Welcome back to the Sports Management Podcast. This episode is sponsored by Insport Education and their new online course, The Foundation of Sport Business. With course modules delivered by sport business experts at companies like the NFL, the Football Association, and Formula E, the Foundations of Sport Business course equips you with everything you need to know to get on or accelerate your career in sport. And for you listeners, I have a great deal. With the code Sports Management Podcast 10, you will get 10% off the course price. Click the link in the description below and sign up to the course today. Now, let's kick off the episode. Welcome to Sports Management Podcast, where you will hear interesting sports management professionals share their stories, experiences, and passion for the sports management industry. I am your host, Marcus Philipsson. Today's guest is a media relations professional. He has worked for the World Anti-Doping Agency, Formula 1, ATP, and the Commonwealth Games Federation. His track record has led to him becoming a leading communicator in international sports. Today, he runs his own company, Nichols Communications, and hosts his own podcast, Athletes the Other Side. Welcome to the Sports Management Podcast, Ben Nichols.
Well, thanks, Marcus. Thanks very much. Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
So happy to talk to you. And first of all, how are you doing?
Doing very well. I'm here in the UK. We, as every conversation these days seems to turn to pandemic, we're doing pretty well here coming out of it. Vaccination rollout going well, so the restrictions are being eased. There's starting to become a bit more life and activity, a bit more normality. So I think, like everyone, I'm enjoying these changing times and looking forward to things getting back to a bit more what we know as normal.
So do I. So you are a media relations professional, as I mentioned in the introduction, and we haven't talked a lot about communication in sports on this podcast yet. So what does a communicator do in sports?
You're happy to be here and try and shed some light on what people in my profession do. I suppose in a broad sense, what communicators in sport do is we tell stories. So we are there to work with, if you take my example, organizations or athletes, brands that might sponsor sports events or sports properties, leaders, CEOs, a whole range of different nations and entities to tell their stories, to make them resonate with their audiences, whether it's the public and fans, whether it's other business professionals, whether it's fellow athletes, whoever they might be trying to reach. It's about telling stories. And doing that is really about always thinking individually about who you're representing, who you're working with, and thinking about what might be of interest to those they're trying to reach. So what are the unique things that make them stand out? What would make me pick up a magazine and read about them, or listen into a podcast and hear about them, or just want to kind of engage in some way? I think the important thing with kind of my profession is, you don't want to sort of conform to, okay, if I've done this in one piece of work or communicated in this way, it's the same for another client, or it's the same for someone else I work with. Everyone is individual. We all have our unique stories. So how can we tell those stories in the best way possible? So I think it's, like I say, it's about telling stories. It's about listening. It's about understanding what the way the world is going, how things are changing, and how people want to consume news as well.
You're running now your own company, Nichols Communications. What more exactly are you helping your clients with?
Sure. So at a practical level, it ranges from everything such as media relations. So that's working between the client and the media and journalists to try and get them interested in certain topics and stories we're trying to tell. And that kind of even more practical, that involves, organizing interviews. It involves writing, and a lot of people in my profession are aware of writing press releases or statements, trying to get messages out there to the media that then goes on and carries on to the public or the audience you're trying to reach. It involves more strategic communications. So that's thinking about the client I might be working with. What's their business strategy? What's their goal and ambition as a company? And how do you communicate that to the audience? So thinking, this is from a behind the scenes perspective. How do you strategically reach? What are the tactics you use on a day-to-day basis to reach the different audiences? It involves a lot of writing, as I mentioned, press release, writing blogs, opinion pieces. So trying to sort of change perceptions, influence opinions, this kind of work. And it involves events. So a lot of what I've done with clients has been, managing press conferences, everything from setting them up to being the moderator, so being the intermediary between the guest and the audience, running media operations at events, so running press offices and all the logistics that go with setting up a major kind of press hub for a sporting event. So some of it is more kind of hands-on, some of it is more written, some of it's more strategic side of things. So it's wide-ranging. And I suppose another aspect is crisis and issues management. That's what I do a lot of. So it's looking at, unfortunately, we're all going to have issues throughout our professional lives. It's looking at how we can best prepare for them, how we can make sure that the organization or the individual I'm working with can be best represented in the public eye, how they can communicate their version of events, how they can make sure they sort of stay on the front foot and really speak to their audience in a kind of calm, methodical, organized way, rather than feel they have to react and they feel they're caught off guard and have their reputation at stake.
That's very interesting. And crisis management is important in, I think, all fields. But what you mentioned there with press releases and press conferences, I mean, you are representing companies that might be selling a product or a service. And if no one knows about it, then it's useless. So, I mean, your job is so important that may be forgotten at times.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think the most important thing is, you want to be able to, in the work I take on, I want to be able to believe in what it is I'm communicating. Yes, it's a job, but it's also a lot of what I do is about a purpose. So a lot of what I work in is anti-doping and sports integrity. It's about fairness in sport, about a level playing field philosophy when it comes to anti-doping. So no cheating, no drugs in sport, that kind of message. It's about selling that message. And yes, an organization that I represent has certain values, but actually they're part of this broader movement. So yeah, it's about how do you communicate that in the right way? Because I think if you have a strong message, there's always a way of reaching those audiences, reaching the individuals you need to. But you have to think, how do they want to receive that information? So, we take a very practical example. We're here doing a podcast right now. It's a very popular medium at the moment, podcasts. People want to hear the kind of more measured, long form content over a 30 minutes, an hour interview. Some people do, versus reading something in a tweet, which is very difficult to communicate a complex message like anti-doping. So you've got to think about what's going to hit the right buttons in terms of reach the people within the time you want to do it. And that gives the message sort of justice, as it were. You can't simplify some messages down to, like I say, a tweet or a very short post on social media when actually it needs to be explained, it needs to be context given, etc. So, yeah, certainly, I hope that answers your question, but it's about how can you communicate in the best way? And does that actually, to cover your point about press conferences, does that need to be face-to-face? Because sometimes when there's an important, serious message to be presented, you want your organization and the individuals, the leaders there, to show their human face, to be able to answer questions, not to hide behind a press release or a tweet or whatever it may be.
How do you solve that problem? As you said, with Twitter, it's very difficult in 240 characters to explain an issue about anti-doping. And maybe podcasting is the right medium for something else. So is the answer here to leverage all the different medias, or at least more of them, in order to get a fair result of what you want to communicate?
Yeah, I mean, certainly some people will take a kind of a wide net approach where they'll try and communicate via all the different channels. So, yeah, Twitter, maybe visually via Instagram, maybe a press release on their website. Maybe they'll put their CEO or leader up for interviews, a multitude of ways. I think, generally, if it comes to some of the complex work, and it's about anti-doping, which is very science heavy, very legal, governmental, a lot of sort of public affairs, it is a very complex world. You can't put out information on a doping case or a doping story, simply by a tweet. Perhaps you can put across the headline message you want to get out there, but then, and I'm getting into the, the practical nuances here, but that's where you then need to link to a greater explanation via a written article or a press release or a statement. So I think certainly you can use the different mediums to communicate the same message. But what, some of those mediums might be about directing people elsewhere where they have to, go and get the full story. So, to come back to your question, absolutely. Some of the channels are better than others for telling particular stories. But I think you have to try and think, okay, who is following me on which channels as well? So, of course, social media, you're expecting a slightly younger audience. Podcast, maybe it's more mixed, but people think, okay, an older generation audience that want to listen in over a longer time, that are less consumed with the immediacy of Twitter and other channels. So I think you've got to think about who you're trying to reach, how quickly you need to reach them, what time they have on their hands, and what impact it's going to have as well. Like, podcast is great for a not obviously just to put out a statement. That's not the objective, but it's great to go into the detail, the reasoning behind decisions, and for explanation and to hear the human side and the personal stories. So I think every channel has its purpose.
For sure, and it really is a science. Yeah, we have mentioned now WADA, World Anti-Doping Agency, a few times where you have worked. So before you do what you do now with your own company, you have worked for, as I mentioned, Formula One and WADA. How did you stumble upon this career path?
Yeah, well, certainly from Formula One to WADA, it's it's not an obvious path, I guess. Well, to give you an example of how that happened, I was earlier in my career. I started in the agents. Well, I started at the beginning actually with the ATP tennis, straight from university. I did an internship at their headquarters in Florida. I then started working obviously with agencies that have multiple clients, so doing multiple pieces of work throughout any given week. And I essentially decided after agency what I wanted to do was work in-house for teams, for governing bodies, for events. So take Formula One, for example, I worked for what was then Lotus Renault Formula One team here in England. And I was the senior press officer. So my job was to travel a lot to a lot of the races. It was to be the personal PR representative for the drivers. So we had Bruno Senna, the nephew of Ayrton, Formula One great. We had Nick Heidfeld, who's a very seasoned German driver, Vitaly Petrov, the Russian driver, Romain Grosjean, who people obviously know and had a really unfortunate incident, or accident, I should say, last year. And so some great drivers, and it's to communicate their own personal brands as top-level athletes. It was also to work with the sponsors, and Formula One is a very sponsor and financially driven sport. So it was to work with the sponsors, how they can talk about their stories of why they're partnering with Lotus Renault. And it was to communicate and talk about the leadership team, the top engineers, the CEO, the team director, etc. So it was really to present the whole brand, and it was a brand. Yes, it was a motorsport team, but it was also a company. Promote them to the motorsport media and to the wider business media and public as well. So to give you an example there, that was Formula One, a very kind of, I suppose, glamorous, exotic sport in many ways. And then you go to WADA, a totally different organization, which is, I've been dealing with the athletes on the front line, and then suddenly I'm working in a very kind of, I guess, the public affairs and the corporate kind of side of sport. So now I was working not with the athletes, but with a body who was responsible for upholding a really important remit, which is fairness in sport and not doping in sport was the message. A clean and fair level playing field. That was the kind of philosophy. So very different journey to get there, a very different experience, and I can certainly go into detail. But it was, similar skills in terms of the communications I was doing, but different messages and different approaches and a different culture all around. So it was, my journey from Formula One was I was approached then to go to WADA in Canada and go and head up their media relations side of things. So it was an opportunity I couldn't refuse and a totally different challenge.
And it's interesting you mentioned it was a different culture, because then you moved on to work at the Promo 7 Sports in the Middle East. So how is the difference in the communication and how you communicate between Europe and in the Middle East? Is there a difference?
Yeah, sure. So Promo 7, I went to, as I mentioned, I started off my career in the agency side of things. I was working in the UK. I took a decision at a point in time to, this was back in 2007, I quit my job, which is, I think we can all look at points in our career where we made mistakes. That wasn't, in hindsight, that wasn't the best decision to do at the time. I wanted to do some work in journalism as well. I did some work sub-editing for some of the newspapers here in England, the Times, Sunday Times. The work there dried up. So I thought, right, what now? I'm out of work. I need a new opportunity. So I booked a return flight to Dubai. I had friends out there. I had family in that part of the world as well. And I thought, look, there's worse things to do. I'll go out for 2 months. And I never used the return ticket, or I did, but 2 years later when I finished there. So I went out with huge kind of an open book, great ambition, but no expectations. I went to some interviews, and then I got a great opportunity to work for Promo 7, which was, essentially the leading sports marketing company in the UAE at the time, and ran the top projects. It ran all of the Emirates sponsored sports events, so the Dubai Rugby Sevens, the World Cup Sevens, cricket, football, all sorts of events for Emirates. And they ran the Dubai Tennis Championship. So I had a role where I wore different hats. I worked some of the time on the Rugby Sevens for Emirates, running the press office, the the media side of that major sports event, and it is a major sports event in Dubai. I had the nations for the Dubai tennis, and that was ATP men's and it was WTA women's. And that was a huge responsibility. And I was, pretty young back then. I was in early mid-20s, great responsibility. That's something, to answer your question about how it was different. Culturally, I wouldn't have got that chance in the UK or another kind of established market, the US, European countries, I don't think, at that point in my career. In Dubai, it was much more kind of formative in the way sports marketing was working out there. It was the early years. It was a young industry. It's come on a lot since, but it meant you got opportunities. People would take a risk and say, go on, we want you to go and try this, and we want you to build your experience. You're the best person for the job, or perhaps you're the only person for the job, but go and do it. So, I think we have those moments in our career when people give us a chance, and that was one of those. And it was so culturally very much more a kind of daredevil, more a risk-taking, more a sort of trial and error culture, I suppose. We tried things. There weren't routine ways of doing things. It was all about figuring it out yourself. And there wasn't so much hand-holding. Back in the UK, there was much more structure and much more kind of formality to how things were done as well. So very different experience in Dubai, but that was a great step in my career. And I recommend it to anyone, going out to work in that part of the world.
It seems very interesting, and maybe you were lucky that it was a new market. As you said, that gave you the opportunities, and also maybe you got a little more responsibilities because they hadn't yet built a framework, and that gave you an opportunity to grow in that role.
Yeah, absolutely it did. And, I wasn't alone. I know other people that have maybe struggled in their work in their home countries and have gone out to that part of the world, which is, as you know, full of expats. Lots of Westerners go out and work there, and they get opportunities they wouldn't back home because it's a different market, because there were fewer people going for those jobs. There was less structure around how the sports events back then were run. So people were trying things out for the first time. People were attempting things. There was, I guess, less competition as well. I'll give you an example. So the Dubai Rugby 7, it is a major sports event in that country. And it was the first year at this new stadium they built in the desert for the Rugby 7s. So not only were we delivering a major sports event, we're essentially building a stadium and building all the infrastructure, the framework, in the middle of a desert, a totally new kind of setup. So huge logistical challenges. The day before, the day of the event, they were still painting the walls. It was very much pulling it all together at the last minute. But there was kind of real will and enthusiasm to make it work without, I guess, the kind of the restrictions and like I said, the formality and the structure that we had back in the UK when, things might have been much more kind of organized and there were more teams and companies delivering it. But we just made do with what the resources we had available. And it shows when you have a good team spirit, great enthusiasm, the right people pulling together, you can really make things happen.
For sure. This episode is sponsored by Insport Education. Their courses equips you with everything you need to know to get started on or accelerate your career in sport. The course, The Foundation of Sports Business, is available now, and they also have a very interesting course coming up, Private Equity in Sport. As a listener of this podcast, you get 10% off both these courses using the code SportsManagementPodcast10. Click the link in the description below and sign up today.
Yeah, so I'll just take you through the chronology a bit more. 2008, after spending first couple of years of my career in London, I moved 2008, 2010, I was in the UAE for Promo 7. Then when I moved back, I came back, and that's when I went on to Lotus Renault Formula 1. And then following that from 2013 to 2017, I worked at WADA in Canada. A big change in culture from Formula 1 to anti-doping. But what a great opportunity. So I was responsible for overseeing media relations for WADA. And that job was a very wide remit. So I was, fronting the press conferences, setting them up, being the public face, the spokesperson of WADA for the media. I was doing a lot of the writing, so the speech writing for our CEO and our president and directors on all the kind of key topics and at the important conferences, writing the press releases, trying to push WADA's message as well into the media proactively. So on a day-to-day basis, what a lot of people probably think of the work I was doing, it was, firefighting. It was dealing with the doping crises and the issues coming in and responding with WADA's position on really complex topics about doping cases and science and medicine, etc. But actually, in addition to that, what we're trying to do is promote a really strong, healthy message about protecting athlete health, protecting fairness, integrity of sport, and really kind of keeping the sporting brand that people, I think, by and large across the world want to see a fair, healthy sporting brand without cheating, keeping that intact. And WADA was the top of the top of the tree for that. It was very much WADA's kind of global responsibility to send the right message about what athletes and the fans want to see in sport. And I think that's, with the vast majority, that's fairness and not cutting corners. So it was about sending that message proactively. It was about working with the athlete committee at WADA closely, trying to promote what we were doing, which is protecting their rights against cheating. And there was, there's a lot of traveling with that role. There's a lot of traveling to the press conferences. During my time there, I started during the cycling years. It was the end of the Lance Armstrong doping crisis that occurred. It then moved on to athletics and what we then saw with the problems at the IAAF and World Athletics. And then it moved on to Russia and everything that, people are aware of in terms of the state-supported doping scandal, WADA's responsibility to investigate it. It moved on from athletics to wider sport. There was a Hollywood movie made. It was a really kind of choppy and turbulent time for anti-doping, but really important time for athletes and all those in anti-doping to stand up for what was right and what was fair. So fantastic 4 years, great challenges, and came out the other side and moved back to the UK. And I will always look fondly on that time.
Yeah, I understand that. What a couple of years to work in anti-doping. It hasn't been calm.
Not calm. There were definitely days when, I and colleagues would get to the office thinking, can it get any stranger? We had the doping crisis with Russia, which was played out in the public domain a lot. We had, as again, people know, there were organization or I don't know, a group of hackers called Fancy Bears that hacked WADA's systems and broke into private athlete medical data and tried a sort of a smear campaign at putting, trying to associate athletes with doping. It was awful what went on. WADA's systems were hacked at that time. It was really difficult, for the organization, but for the movement, for athletes who were having their names thrown around as potential dopers, which wasn't the case. And to try and continue with the day-to-day mission of clean sport on top of, the biggest doping scandal we've probably ever seen. And how, an organization like WADA and the other bodies that had authority to do so should manage that. Because there was big, fracture and division in terms of those that, wanted strong action against a country cheating the system and those that didn't so much. So it was testing, I think, for the movement in the industry about how to handle something like this, because it was the first time we'd seen it, certainly during since WADA was born in 1999.
Then after that, you moved on to the Commonwealth Games.
That's right. So I came back to the UK. I did a small stint actually working as head of communications for the athletics integrity unit. Again, working with my former boss, David Howman, who got a huge amount of time for David and everything I learned from him whilst he was the boss. And yeah, he moved on as to chair up the athletics integrity unit, which was set up by Lord Sedco to deal with athletics' governance and doping and corruption problems to an extent. And it's done a great job in the 4 years it's been going. So I spent a stint there, 6 months or so. And then I got the opportunity to go and join the Commonwealth Games Federation. And what a fantastic opportunity that was, and one I grabbed with both hands. It was to go and work as the Group Director of Communications and Public Affairs. And that was a very different challenge. It was, yes, the governing body side of sport and sort of Olympic sport, if you call it that. But it was overseeing communications and marketing for Commonwealth sport, essentially. And we had, I believe, 71 national Commonwealth Games associations, if I'm right in remembering, which is similar to national Olympic committees. And it was essentially to have an umbrella strategy of how we can communicate, how we can talk to the Commonwealth and hopefully further afield about what Commonwealth sport is and what the Commonwealth Games is. So it was to do that from the Commonwealth Games Federation point of view. And it was also to encourage all the national associations to promote in a similar way, to talk about the values of Commonwealth sport and how that differs to the Olympic Games. And that was all about, there was a big focus on equality. So there was a big focus on, we had some great messages coming out of the Gold Coast Games, which were about female sports and having male referees for those, and traditionally male sports having female referees. So really kind of making equality a real kind of touch point for the games. It was about reconciliation for the Aboriginal groups in Australia and having them feeling engaged in the Commonwealth Games. it was about kind of, gender equality. It's about a real kind of fairness streak that ran through the Commonwealth Games message. And so in terms of my work, it was, setting up the strategy and kind of the framework from London. It was then to go out and manage the team in the Gold Coast and the operations of the press centres there, and all the staff we had on board to run the press centres, to run the broadcast centres, to manage the press conferences, to communicate what's happening on the pitch, but also off the pitch as well. All the companies involved, to communicate what the organisers were doing, to communicate everything to the fans about ticket sales. It's a very different challenge, but a really exciting one. And hopefully we got across to different audiences what the Commonwealth Games is today in 2021, or what it was in 2018, and how it's different to the Olympic Games, because it's never going to be an Olympic Games. It used to be a much bigger deal, I guess, the Commonwealth Games to many people, but to many, I think it's declined in importance over the years. But we were saying it doesn't need to be the scale of the Olympics. It just needs to be different, and people need to believe in it, enjoy it. And I think one other thing I'd say about the Commonwealth Games is it really brought out, I guess, what people used to love in sport, that kind of David and Goliath, the real competition. Not necessarily always, yes, there were some of the top athletes in the world were there, and the Commonwealth global population meant we had some of the top countries there: Australia, Canada, the UK countries, South Africa, etc. But actually, it was the big countries versus the really small island states that wouldn't be competing in the Olympics in those kind of events, which was fascinating. And it was those kind of extremes that made it really, really exciting, and that made it relate to people, because they loved watching an Australia take on a Samoa, or a small island state of thousands of people, not millions. So those are the stories that we tried to tell, and to separate the Commonwealth Games from the Olympics.
Yeah, and that's what makes it unique and interesting, that it's not a copy of the Olympics. It's something different.
Yeah, exactly right.
We have talked about your career, and you have worked in, as we have talked about, it's a long career in many different parts of the world. If there is someone listening that they want to get into the media relations profession in sports, what would be your advice for a young person with these aspirations?
What would be my advice? Well, I think there's no textbook of go and do this degree, go and do your apprenticeship, go whatever it may be, more of a structured path. I think for my career, I know I have lots of contemporaries and colleagues who've had great careers, but they have a totally different path than I've had. And I think what that tells me is everyone is an individual and will have their different opportunities when doors open. It's whether you walk through them and go for the opportunities, or whether whether you're a risk taker, whether you always think something better will come along. Actually, it might not. So I think it's about taking opportunities and trying things. For me, my advice would be, similar to what I did when I was in my teens and finishing off school. I then started working in some of the sports press offices, mainly in tennis, which was my favorite and kind of the sport I grew up with. So that was going to work at Wimbledon, what was then the Queen's Tennis Tournament, the Stella Artois Championships, it was called, the British Formula One Grand Prix, working in the press offices. Some of it was paid work, some of it was voluntary, but it was about getting experience, learning how a major press office worked with all the top journalists, learning about the culture of deadlines when they're trying to get stories with a tight deadline, learning about the logistics of how the broadcast center is set up, how the player relations works, what their responsibilities are for interviews when they finish competing, all these kind of technical aspects of press office work. But what I learned is, it was great for networking. I met some fantastic journalists there, great connections. I learned a lot about delivering an event. I learned a lot about teamwork, all these sort of skills that I think are really important. And so, what I'd recommend to others is to seek out the opportunities. If you love sport and you want to work in journalism or communications of some capacity, look at the sports event calendar in your country. Look at when you've got time off school, university, or whatever it may be. Make sure you approach the CEOs and the leaders and the decision makers and put yourself out there and say, this is what I think I can bring to the table. I'm looking for an opportunity. Can I come and help? But, really think of it from their perspective. What are they looking for? They're looking for perhaps resource, people with good imagination and good intuition. They're looking for people that have confidence, but people that want to have the right attitude. So I think it's about identifying the type of places you'd like to work. Maybe you have to offer some voluntary time at the beginning, certainly to build up your CV, and going out and doing it, not sitting back and think there'll always be a perfect opportunity or I just need to wait and apply for this perfect job. I think it's about building up this sort of portfolio that you then have in your back pocket when it comes to going for paid opportunities after university.
Yeah, that is great advice. And we have talked a lot about the internships on this podcast before, the importance of just jumping on an opportunity. And it might not be exactly what you want right now, but that might lead you to the next step and the next step, just to get your foot in and get a start somewhere.
Yeah, I think that's right. And look, there's a tough message out there to youngsters as well. Look, in sweeping broad terms, there is a generation, I think, growing up now of kind of, I hate to say entitlement, but thinking they are owed a great job to begin with, thinking it will come on a plate to them and that's their right. Hate to disappoint you. It's not a right. You have to earn it. Yes, there's a bit of luck and chance about being in the right place at the right time. But a lot of it comes from, there's no science to it. It's hard work. Opportunities come along. It's about putting yourself out there. It's about going and finding those opportunities. It's about, trying and trying and trying again. And something one day will stick. You will send many applications for jobs or for opportunities and you'll get a lot of refusals. I think we all accept that. But something will open. If you speak to someone, you never know where that conversation will lead as well. That can open doors. I think it's about accepting, there's not going to be this perfect at exactly the right time when you're growing up in your early adulthood, the perfect opportunity. It's not going to come on a plate. You're not owed anything. It's about making those opportunities happen. It's about persevering. And it's about, I think, just being a good person along the way and learning and being humble, because that's a long way in today's world.
Some tough love from Ben Nichols to all the young people out there.
Something like that. I think we've all been there. And if I can help in any way, make some people kind of get up and get moving a bit faster rather than wait for things to come to them, trust me, that goes a long way, I think.
Approaching the end here, is there something that I haven't asked you that you feel is important to mention?
Well, I think just on the advice I would give people coming up through the industry, I think there's a lot of, how do I put it? In business today, I think there's to an extent, there's a lack of risk-taking compared to perhaps what they used to be. I know that's a broad term because it depends on the sector and what you're required to do. But I am a big fan of entrepreneurialism. I'm a big fan of people creating things, coming up with ideas, but seeing them through and having a go at things. Because you'll hear from a lot of entrepreneurs, won't you? They've had so many knocks along the way, but that makes them stronger people. I think what I would say, as that relates to the communications and sports profession is, you don't need to conform to this is the way you must do something and you will have a successful career, tick. It just doesn't work like that. I think what I would say is create your own brand to an extent. Be confident in the person you are. Don't try and be something you're not, someone you're not. Play on your strengths, know what your strengths are, speak to people, ask how they see you, what they think you're good at, where they think you can improve, and create that brand and be confident about it. So whether that means, and when I say create a brand, I mean, whether that means if you're a good writer, start writing some pieces, submitting them to places, set up your own website and publish them yourself, build an audience, create things that, essentially add again to that kind of back pocket portfolio that you build up. And I think if you create that brand, you are then showing, okay, this is who I am. This is what I'm projecting as a professional person in this industry. You see what I mean? You're not looking for a perfect opportunity saying, I might fit that. Actually, what you want to create is, this is who I am. This is why I'm employable. And almost, make yourself attractive to employers to come to you. That's what you want to get to, is where they think this is a really interesting person. They do interesting things. They do skills. Almost an ideal. Could we create a position for them because we think they could be useful to take our business in X or Y direction? So I think, rather than trying to fit yourself into what potential opportunities there might be, it's actually making yourself an attractive, potential employee for others to come and chase if you can.
Definitely. That's so great advice. And something I will bring with me myself also in the future here.
We can all do it better. I'm still learning that myself. I will pick up skills along the way as I'm older. I'm sure I didn't have 5 or 10 years ago, but things now I'm sure I will be looking to improve on and get better at. But you get better at these things from practice. And I think it's just about trying to accumulate as much experience and knowledge as you can. That makes you the unique professional property you are, if I can put it that way. And that, I think, is probably one of the most important bits of advice I can give.
Yeah, I think that's great. And we are all our own brand, and we need to sell ourselves, as you said. It's super important. I just want to give a shout out to your podcast, Athletes the Other Side. I found it here a little while back, and I'm trying to catch up on your episodes. I think it's great. But just if you want to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. Well, I talked about brands. I don't think human beings are one-dimensional. I think we might be known or think ourselves, okay, we are a builder, we are a financier, we are a communications person, but actually we have different dimensions, different skills, and that's what makes us interesting, right? So hopefully one of my skills that I'd like to think is interviewing. I've talked about telling stories in the work I do. It's also I enjoy hearing stories and hearing what others' unique journeys have been in life, and that's what Athletes the Other Side is. It's about I've worked with a lot of athletes over the years, been fortunate to hear their stories, hear their journeys. They are, by and large, fascinating, very driven individuals, but they have many sides of their life away from the sporting pitch that, I think you or I and other, in inverted commas, normal people can relate to. And we often don't hear about that because we hear about what they're doing on the football pitch or in the car or whatever sport they might play. So Athletes the Other Side is, a new podcast I set up 6 months ago, speaking to athletes I know or others that I'd like to speak to about what they do professionally, by and large, what they do away from sports. So whether that's charitable passions they have, whether that's in business, whether that's in kind of purpose-driven work. Some of the athletes I speak to have a passion about anti-doping. And that's interesting hearing about how they want to move the needle and change the future of clean sport. I've spoken to many athletes that have gone on to completely different careers. And that, I think that's quite fascinating because a lot of people think they're an athlete, full stop. But, they're an athlete maybe till they're in their early 30s or in some sports earlier. What are they going to do for the remainder of their life? And that could be 50, 60 years. So they have a huge amount to offer. It's about hearing what they have to offer, getting advice from them, and hopefully others being inspired along the way. So that's what Athletes the Other Side is. And I really encourage, if I can give a little shout out, encourage others to listen in like they do to this, to that, if they want to hear about athletes and be inspired. It's also on Apple and Spotify and all the usual channels.
Super interesting. When the listeners are finishing this episode, they can jump right over and listen to your podcast, Athletes the Other Side.
Well, they'll be listening to two great podcasts then, won't they?
I would like to think so, yeah. The last question is pretty funny because you have actually helped me to find a lot of very great guests for this podcast. But in addition to these people, if you could choose a guest from my podcast, who would you recommend?
Who would it be? Wow. Can I choose one or can I choose two or three?
Go ahead. As many as you'd like.
I'll pick three individuals who had a really strong impact on my career, I suppose. In no particular order, I absolutely think you should speak to Travis Tygart. He is the long-standing CEO of US Anti-Doping. I've worked with him extensively. Huge amount of respect for the work he's done over the years, and a fearless sort of crusader for clean sport and fascinating guest, great character, and would be a great addition to the podcast, no doubt. Similarly, in anti-doping, David Howman, I mentioned him earlier with the Athletics Integrity Unit. New Zealander, I worked with him for many years at WADA. He was the Director General there. Huge amount of anti-doping, sports integrity experience, and sports experience. Tennis background from a sports-loving country, and got a huge amount of knowledge about sports governance, anti-doping, athlete rights, all these kind of important topics in modern-day Olympic sport. I think thirdly, I mentioned three because thirdly, I'd like to recommend Donal Killaley, who was another individual in my career who's hugely influential. He was the boss at Promo 7 when I was working in Dubai, and I talked about getting chances out there that I might not have got back in the UK or other countries. And he absolutely gave that open arms approach to giving people a chance, however young they are in their career, trying things, learning to make mistakes, and I made mistakes. We all made mistakes, but actually giving people the opportunity to grow from going and working in things that they might have taken another 5 or 10 years to do elsewhere. He was, he was delivering that whole Dubai Rugby Sevens for Emirates Airlines. He ran the agency, biggest sports marketing agency in that country at that time. and had a real kind of positive can-do attitude and was very motivational. So I absolutely recommend Dona would be a good guest on the show as well.
That's 3 great names. I will keep those in mind for the future. Ben Nichols, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the Sports Management Podcast. And I wish you all the best in the future with your own company and with your podcast, Athletes the Other Side.
Brilliant. Thanks, Marcus. It's great to be on. And look forward to speaking again soon.
Will do. Thank you for listening to Sports Management Podcast. Do you have thoughts or ideas about this podcast, or do you know someone that I should interview next? Please reach out to me on sportsmpodcast@gmail.com or visit my website sportsmanagementpodcast.com. If you prefer social media, you can find me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at sportsmpodcast.
Fall is all about cozy comforts, but when you're prioritizing your health, it's easy to feel like you're missing out. With Hero Bread, you can enjoy all your fall favorites because they're made with Hero Bread sliced bread loaves, tortillas, bagels, dinner rolls, and more. Try their all-new Hero Noodles with 12 grams of protein and just 80 calories. You won't believe Hero Bread's options have 0 to 5 grams net carbs and are high fiber from the taste and texture. They've even got small batch drops of indulgent favorites like the popular Hero Croissant. And right now, Hero Bread is offering 10% off your order. Go to hero.co and use code FALL25 at checkout. That's FALL25 at hero.co. All figures are per serving of Hero Bread. Contains 2 to 18 grams of fat per serving. See the product nutrition panels on hero.co for more information.